It's nice to see everyone in person here at the Zendo, and also some familiar faces online. And I hope we have some members from our Bolivian Sangha present this evening. So a warm welcome to them also. It's great to have you with us as we begin this pilgrimage. My name is Mukei. For those of you who don't know me, I am one of the senior students here at the Zendo. I lead our People of Color sitting group, and I'm also a novice Zen priest here at the Zendo. Rahatsu is a commemoration that most Buddhist temples observe. They commemorate the 6 days that Shakyamuni Buddha sat underneath a Bodhi tree to become enlightened. And some people are very familiar with the story. He was a young priest, a young prince, who lived a very sheltered life. His father wanted to make sure he wasn't exposed to old age, sickness, and death, and did everything he could in his power to let his son see it. Until one day he convinced the servant to let him out, and he observed sickness, old age, and death. And this happened more than a number of times. And then one of the excursions of seeing people, he came across an ascetic. And these were a group of religious people, mostly men, who traveled throughout India and who lived quite an ascetic lifestyle. And Siddhartha, before he became Shakyamuni, was very attracted to it. And so he, the story goes, left his family home in the middle of the night to follow this ascetic, and cut off his hair, assumed a very rustic lifestyle, clothing, visiting graveyards, eating very little. The story is that he lived on a sesame seed a day, and he became quite emaciated, because he was following after something that was very meaningful to him. So the story goes that one day he was just at the brink of death, and he had this thought, something's wrong. There has to be another way to live this life. How do I make peace with suffering, old age, and death? And depending on how you hear the story, a young lady shows up with something that looks like rice pudding, which could have been also an offering to an Indian god, but she presents him with a bowl, which he takes and eats, and all of a sudden he's beginning to come back to life. The story goes is that as he was finishing this bowl of food, he threw the bowl into a nearby body of water, and instead of the bowl going downstream, it went upstream. And it went to a place where all bowls of prior Buddhas had gone to. And so he then picked himself up, washed himself off, and decided he was going to sit and try to explore the great question of impermanence, sickness, old age, and death. And in the course of sitting these 6 days, he encountered what's called this entity called Mara, who confronted him with images of violence, storms, sexual temptations. And somehow the story goes, Siddhartha did not give in. Now, we might assume that he was so passive about it that that's how he managed to do it. But I would like to think that even in his non-action, he was taking action. A man by the name of Tim Burrett wrote a story about a guru who had a cat. And he had a sangha of his own, and this cat would disrupt the evening worship. So it was decided to tether the cat to the altar. And at least the cat would be in place while the evening worship could go on. Well, the story goes is that the guru died, and then the cat died. But everyone felt that there was a religious significance in keeping the cat tethered at the altar. So they brought another cat. That cat died. They brought another cat. That cat died. And then it went on like this for a long time until over the years it was written that there was a liturgical significance in having a cat tethered at the altar. We have all been tethered by something. We all have cats that have been tethered by something. There's another story that Mr. Barrett tells about Mara. Here we go again. Is walking through a village, and they see a monk walking with a downcast gaze, and his face is aglow. And so one attendant says to Mara, "What's he looking at?" Mara says, "A piece of truth." The other attendant says, "Doesn't that get you angry that somebody might be wanting to find a piece of truth?" "No," Mara said. "Right after this, he'll make it into a belief." Rahatsu. Rahatsu is space that helps us to look at thoughts, feelings, patterns that have been imposed on us, and patterns that we've taken on in order to survive. We all have our maras. Our maras are sitting right in the Zendo. Our maras are sitting right with you, whatever space you're sitting in. Who's questioning, why the heck are you doing this? Why are you staying up at night and losing sleep? The same question that was posed to Siddhartha. You think you have an idea what enlightenment is like? Prove it to me. Prove it to me. Do you know what enlightenment is like? And I think we get away from what the true spirit of why we do this. It's not something that we attach ourselves to. It's not something that it's a belief. But it's a process. Story is that in the 6 days that Siddhartha was sitting, his past lives came back to him. He was, in a lot of other lives, he was a parrot. He was a quail. He was a deer. He was a devil. He was a murderer. He was an ogre. All these past lives came before Siddhartha on that night. And they said that his sitting was just one more step, one more past life that he had to live, to go through, to achieve enlightenment. And perhaps this is also the reason we look at Rohatsu. We all have past lives. We all have past lives. And then we can make a decision to move them away, or we, like Siddhartha, can sit and look at them. There's a story that a young monk asked an abbot, "How can I recognize someone who's enlightened?" The abbot replied, "The first thing to consider is if they are helpful to other beings." Buddha had to learn how to be helpful. Mara was not going to give up on him. And so after he had this revelation, Mara, as the story goes, said, "You know, you're not in a bad place. You've seen something, so why don't you just stay there and feel good? You got it all." You know, let those people with their past lives and whatever go on. You stay where you are. And the story goes that he stood up and he went to teach. Notice that an enlightened person is helpful to others, doesn't care for others. There's a difference. Enlightenment is not a state. It's not a state of grace or some kind of supernatural event, but it is a process. Enlightenment does not free us from old age and death. Even the Buddha himself suffered sickness, old age, and eventually death. But perhaps we can see enlightenment as being a haven for all the universe, and it begins with us. It begins with us. I believe that's what the Buddha saw when he saw the sky, that morning star. There's no more they and us. It's us. That's why he got up and he taught. So whatever Mara sends us, these hours we are together, let's sit and encounter those things. And you'll know what they are. Mara was talking to me in the dressing area before we started the talk. So Rahatsu is a time for us to be helpful, to look at those things that have gotten in our way, that prevents us from being helpful. But that's all right. We had someone who's taught us not to get rid of them, but to become acquainted with them. Because when we become acquainted with them, we are helpful to others. It's about being intimate. It's not about stratification. It's about being right where people are. And this is a lifetime of work, like it took him. He had to go through so many prior lives to get to this. So maybe for us, tonight, we'd have to look at what else do we need to look at in order to be helpful. So again, I leave you with the question that the monk asked of the abbot. How can I recognize if someone is enlightened? The abbot replied, the first thing to consider, if they are helpful to other beings.